Good morning, everyone. Thanks for making it here so early. I hope you all had a chance to refuel a little bit with some coffee. Just a couple of housekeeping reminders for anybody who might not have been here yesterday. We're in Uniting to Save World Cultures, so if you were looking for another conference, you may exit the room now. I wanted to remind everyone that the Smithsonian is webcasting and recording this event, and so you consent to the use of your image just by being here, and that we are tweeting this event, and you'll see the Twitter hashtag right up here. Please tweet and get us some recognition and followership, and that this is also live webcast, so I'm hoping that we can remind people to watch the webcast. This morning, we have our panel kickoff on building the capacity for resilience. And I'd like to introduce first my colleague, Susan Wolfinbarger, who is Director of Geospatial Technologies Project for Scientific Responsibility, Human Rights, and Law Program at the American Association for the Advancement of Science. And Susan and I and colleagues from Penn and many other organizations have been working together on the Safeguarding the Heritage of Syria and Iraq project, SHOSI. So welcome, Susan.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for showing up. I know it was just to, hear me speak and not our really great panelists. As Corey said, I work at the AAAS, and I am a geographer, and I work a lot in the realms of human rights and humanitarian response, and as she said, more recently in cultural heritage. And so I'm really excited to be introducing today's first panel, Building the Capacity for Resilience, because a lot of the work that I'm most familiar with is related to community participation, mapping, disaster response, and resilience to extreme events, whether they're natural or man-made. And I've really enjoyed being one of the organizers of this conference over the past several months to possibly a year. I've learned a lot about cultural heritage that I didn't know before in our discussions, and learned a lot about responses to threats, and it's helped me to realize ways to link cultural heritage into the work that I do. So I want to thank my co-PIs for also giving me the opportunity to introduce this morning, because it made me do a bit of extra homework on the topic, so I learned even more. So I want to just take a minute to talk about the linkages between cultural heritage, human rights, and resiliency to disaster, since that's what I focus on in my own work, and I'm going to take the advantage of having the stage for just a minute. So human rights and the work that I do in human rights is a lot about the documentation of human rights violations and the search for reparations for victims. Human rights are increasingly being discussed alongside both humanitarian response and cultural heritage in times of crisis. And all these things are really closely related to one another, and they often overlap in very tangible and physical ways on the ground during responses. So as just the tiniest bit of background, and in the most general terms, there are two major human rights documents that recognize the right to culture and the right to participate freely in the culture of one's community: the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the International Covenant on Economic, Cultural, and Social, I always mess this one up, Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. So if we want to think about resiliency and tying that into cultural rights, I want to share with you first a definition of resiliency that I think is really appropriate. And that is, resiliency is the ability of a system, community, or society exposed to hazards to resist, absorb, accommodate to, and recover from the effects of a hazard in a timely and efficient manner. So bringing all these ideas together, I think one of the most important aspects of a rights-based approach to cultural heritage and resiliency is that people are rights holders. And they aren't just objects that we are conducting humanitarian or disaster response and recovery efforts on. They have a stake, they're stakeholders. And we have to give them the right to be consulted in the measures that are being taken in recovery efforts. And people who have a stake and a say in these efforts will be more likely to recover and thus become more resilient in the future. So actually moving into the topic of our panel and the first two questions that you probably saw in your agenda, I want to take an anecdote for each of these two questions. The first question was, what planning assists in the resilience of cultural heritage during a crisis? And I want to share a slightly, maybe comical, firsthand experience that I had. I was just traveling in Chile a couple of weeks ago when the 8.3 magnitude earthquake hit on September 16th. And I was at the time driving towards Valparaiso, which was maybe 100 miles from the epicenter of that 8.3 magnitude earthquake. And so the initial earthquake lasted for about 3 minutes, and I was at a gas station, and everyone just initially came running out of the gas station. But then, you know, the ground is shaking, and everybody's just kind of hanging out. You know, like, okay, we're used to this kind of thing. And the aftershocks and everything in total lasted about an hour. And after that ended, I was really just amazed at how everybody that I encountered throughout the rest of my trip, just were able to go ahead with their everyday lives because of the resilience of the Chilean infrastructure to earthquakes in particular, because they do suffer a lot of earthquakes. It was the day before the National Independence Day celebrations, and everybody started drinking their terremotos, which it means earthquake in Spanish. So it was a very appropriate holiday and drinking opportunity. But this preparedness for earthquakes that happened so much in that country mitigated a lot of the potential disaster, and I really think that highlights how they've built up their resiliency and the relative lack of damage and loss of life from an 8.4 earthquake, you know, was just really astounding to me. And just as a reminder and some comparison to recent earthquakes that we're all familiar with, the Nepal earthquake was a 7.8, the Haiti earthquake was a 7.0, and our DC earthquake that we had in 2011 was a 5.8. And we all know how much we all panicked over that little tremor. So my whole experience, I think, in Chile during that earthquake was summed up in the conversation I had when I called my hotel in Valparaiso and said, you know, hey, there's an earthquake happening, what should I do? And they said, well, we're being evacuated right now because there's going to be a tidal wave, but you can just come tomorrow. And yeah. And I showed up the next day, and everything was pretty much okay. There was some debris in the streets, but really it was okay. I just, you know, everybody just picked up and kept going. The second anecdote that I want to share, and I'm going to speed up because I do want to help save some of our time that we've lost this morning, but the second one, I want to talk about the question, what outcomes can demonstrably be linked to prior planning? And I want to pull from the work of my SHOSI partners for this anecdote, so I can't really take any credit for it, but I want to share it with you, partially because I think it's an example of what Catherine was talking about yesterday, is that like we need some feelings of hope and some feelings that, you know, some of the things that we're doing are really actually making a difference on the ground. And so the example I want to talk about is the Mara Museum. And the Smithsonian and the University of Pennsylvania did a training in the summer of 2014 on emergency preparedness with people from the museum. And on June 15th of this year, the Syrian Arab Republic government dropped a barrel bomb on the museum. And there was significant damage to several parts of the museum, but that damage wasn't nearly as bad as it could have been. And that's because of the training from Smithsonian and UPenn. They worked with the local staff of the museum and helped them to obtain supplies and shared knowledge that they needed to safeguard the contents of the museum. So after that training that they held in the summer, the staff was able to go back home and do these preparedness measures like sandbagging and things of that nature. And so when the barrel bomb hit in the courtyard of the museum, the outcome was a lot better than what we would have normally expected in such a situation. I looked at the satellite imagery of the museum, and there is a very large crater at that museum. And so I think that this type of training of capacity efforts and the building up of local communities and local heritage professionals is what we all should be trying to do. We have our, our main focus things, but I think that this is something that everybody needs to be thinking about, ways that they can do efforts like that to help build up local communities as much as possible. So, getting back to the panel and our speakers. We have some really great speakers this morning that are going to be talking to you about building capacity for resilience. And we have case studies from New Orleans, Haiti, and Sichuan, China. So we have a hurricane and 2 earthquakes that we're going to be talking about. And these examples that we're going to hear about really show a lot the lack of preparation that has been a defining factor in cultural heritage responses in the past. And so I think they're going to help us think about what we can do now to prepare prior to the next conflict or disaster, and what will best help prepare local communities to respond to catastrophes. They're going to talk about some really great issues. Some of them are about processes and how they dealt with the specific issues on the ground and some of the challenges that they encountered. Such as building cultural inventories to be able to then respond and save them. And as we all are aware from our discussions about Haiti yesterday, there are so many logistical issues that each of the presenters have had to deal with, working across cultures, working across organizations, and across scales. And we're going to hear also a warning to us, I think, about what can happen when you do cultural heritage recovery as a solely top-down approach instead of taking into consideration the local people. So I think that that is going to be a really important thing for us to think about and in this conversation. But there have been a lot of strides in coordination, methods of rapid response, and the technologies to help in those efforts over the past decades that the work of our panelists have really pushed forward. And I hope that we're also going to hear maybe in the discussions about some of the things that have happened in more recent disasters. To wrap up, I just want to say that these papers are highlighting the ways that efforts at assistance during crisis have changed dramatically in the past decade, and they're giving us a roadmap for ways that we can act to prepare communities ahead of time. And they all make a very important point, and that is that local involvement is the most important factor in resiliency. This will be shown through each of the examples, and particularly I think in the case of Haiti that we're very familiar with, and then an opposite situation that occurred in China. Local involvement provides the support for recovery efforts, which we've already learned may take many years. So during this long process of recovery, local communities can become more resilient and acquire the ability to recover in the face of future disasters. Any effort that takes local cultures and conditions into its decision-making is more likely to result in equitable outcomes and to allow the local people to have ownership of the preservation of their own culture. This will build more culturally resilient communities that are in a better position to cope with disasters and other threats in the future. So that is my introduction, and now I want to switch and introduce our first speaker for this morning, which is Deidre McCarthy from the National Park Service.